I used to think my balcony was the safest place in my apartment. High up, hidden, quiet. A spot where I could breathe in the night air and momentarily forget the suffocating repetition of living alone. But that night, just a single glance down to the parking lot was enough to make sure I'd never step out onto that balcony again. It was a little past 1 a.m. I had just finished brushing my teeth, mouth still full of mouthwash, and absent-mindedly slid open the balcony door. The air outside was cold and quietly pleasant. The wind blew softly. The trees behind the building rustled like a steady background song. I stood there for a few seconds, staring into the dim haze of the empty parking lot below, expecting nothing, just a habit. But something made me freeze. A shadowed figure looking straight up at me. No movement, no avoidance, just standing there, watching. I thought he couldn't see me, my lights were off, but that gaze, it wasn't searching, it was exact. I stepped back half a pace, a chill running straight down my spine. Then he raised his hand, slowly, his index finger pointed directly at my balcony, and his mouth began to stretch. A long, deep smile, one that held no trace of humanity. Before I could react, his finger began to move. One floor, then another, and another. I'm Evan Cole. I moved into this place about a year ago. The building is old, tucked away at the end of a quiet street. Trees grow wildly along the rear fence, and behind the building is an open parking lot, wide, empty, and poorly lit. My apartment is on the 5th floor, the top of Block A. Few choose to live that high up, no elevator. I chose it because the fewer people, the quieter it is. Every night, the place sinks into a silence so dense it feels like a soundless valley. Only the flicker of old hallway lights and the soft creaks of the wooden stairs when someone walks by. The neighbors keep to themselves. No chats, no community groups. I liked that, truly. I've always been the quiet type, self-contained, never needed much social contact. That night, I came home late from work. My head ached. I ate a quick meal, showered in silence, then brushed my teeth. My routine, cracked the balcony door to let the room air out. It was pitch black outside, but I still stepped out, glass in hand, leaning over the rail like always. I had stood there countless times before, but something in the air that night felt wrong. Not the wind, not a smell, just the undeniable feeling that I was no longer alone. And when I looked down, I knew. The quiet I used to love was just a thin shell. Down there, bathed in pale yellow light, he was waiting for me. I stood frozen, as if my feet were glued to the floor. Below, the man, if I could even call him that, was dragging a blood-soaked figure across the parking lot. He wasn't carrying it, not lifting it. He was dragging it barehanded, letting the body tear a deep red groove into the concrete. With every pull, the white shirt of the corpse crumpled upward, revealing a back torn and shredded. No reaction, no twitch. Just the silent slide of something being shoved across a world without sound. He stopped. I thought he'd turn around and leave. But no, he began to lift his head, slowly, one vertebra at a time, as if he had never lifted it before, as if looking upward was something foreign, wrong, not meant for him. Then his eyes, if they were eyes at all, found me. I didn't feel like I was being watched. I felt like a map had been unfolded, and I was the red X drawn in. No eyes should stare that long without blinking. And in that moment, I didn't just see him. I saw myself. Inside his eyes. A version of me, cowering, pale, face twisted in the same panic I was feeling now. Impossible. I hadn't left the balcony, but I was being reflected from his side. Then, he smiled. His mouth opened so wide it looked dislocated. The skin around it stretched and split. No lips, only darkness, and a sound like air being breathed in backward. He raised his hand again, index finger trembling, pointed right at me, each joint bending back, then snapping straight. And he began to count. Time thickened, slowed. There was only the space between me and something learning how to come closer. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid he'd come back, but because it felt like he'd never left. Even though I could no longer see him down in the parking lot, I could still feel his eyes, a formless weight clinging to my back, like a layer of cold seeping into my skin. I shut the balcony door, drew the thick curtains, turned off every light, but even in the dark, I couldn't escape the thought. I was being watched. I tried to dismiss it with logic, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw him again, that smile and that hand, still pointing upward. The next morning, I pulled back the curtain and looked down. No one, no blood, no body being dragged. Everything looked as if it had never happened. But the following night, when I stepped out onto the balcony again, I didn't see him. But I knew he was still out there. Only this time, I no longer knew which floor I stood on in his eyes. The next morning, I went down to the front desk. My voice trembled as I asked about the security cameras. The guard looked at me, slowly shook his head. "Nothing strange, sir. No one came in after 11 p.m. I asked to see the parking lot footage. The footage sped through the night. Only a silent, empty void. No figure, no blood, no movement. I asked a few neighbors on the lower floors. No one had heard anything. No one saw anything strange. An old lady on the third floor said, 'You sure it wasn't just a dream, dear?' I began to doubt myself, but that feeling of being watched through every floor, every layer of skin, it was still there. I started locking the balcony door tighter, pushing furniture against it. I turned my phone off at night. I stopped stepping outside after 10 p.m., but none of it stopped that feeling that something was quietly coming closer. That night, around 2:15 a.m., I was curled up in the dark when I heard a sound. Click. Very soft, like metal being gently flicked. I didn't dare turn on the lights. I just listened. Silence. Then, click. Again, closer, right outside the balcony. I gritted my teeth, crawled out of bed, grabbed my phone, and crept toward the door. I didn't open it. I didn't dare peek through the curtain. The next morning, I checked the door camera. Nothing. But when I stepped outside, I saw it. A long black streak on the floor tiles, as if something had been dragged. Straight, precise. And it stopped exactly at the edge of my door. I moved out that same night. Didn't pack much. I had a clear feeling. If I stayed one more night, if he counted just one more floor, everything would end in a way I couldn't imagine. I relocated to a ground floor apartment in another building. No windows facing the street, no balcony. But I still couldn't sleep. Every night, I'd wake up at exactly 2:03 a.m. I tried changing my routine, tried medication. Nothing worked. My body remembered. It remembered that moment when he stopped and looked directly at me. And then one night, I dreamt of the parking lot again. I looked up at the 5th floor. Someone was standing on the balcony, silent, face pale, arm extended, counting 1, 2, 3 dots. I jolted awake. My phone screen had just lit up with a motion alert from the door camera. I opened the feed. Nothing was clear, just a shadow standing under the streetlight, head tilted upward. I couldn't see its face, but I knew. This time, he had finished counting. And maybe I was only standing where someone else once looked down. I am Lily. I was 22 years old, living alone in a small suburb near Tacoma, Washington. I always thought I was strong, independent, and not easily scared. But that rainy night changed everything. Outside, the rain poured down heavily, and the wind howled as it battered the windows. I curled up on the sofa, rewatching an old movie when, creak, a sound came from upstairs. A noise like dragging or scratching, small but clear. I turned up the TV volume, telling myself it must be the wind, but it happened again, this time longer. Under the pounding rain against the old tin roof, the house seemed to shrink with each gust of wind. I had been living alone here for almost a year, a 2-story old-style house with a narrow hallway, low ceiling, and wooden stairs that creaked with every step. Nights were usually quiet, so much so that I had gotten used to the sounds of water pipes expanding and the roof creaking under the weight of the rain. But that night, every sound seemed stretched out, sharp, unfamiliar, and evoking a feeling of something else. The house lights flickered as if about to go out. I got up from the sofa and grabbed a flashlight from the drawer. The rain kept falling, and the wind whipped against the window, making it shake violently. There were no dogs barking, no traffic noise. Suddenly, I realized no one knew I was home, alone. My hands trembled slightly as I turned on the flashlight, its weak beam lighting each step as I climbed the stairs. And as soon as I reached the bedroom door, I heard it, a very soft sound, like someone holding their breath, waiting for me to open the door. The bedroom was completely empty. I swept the flashlight left to right, checking every corner, every gap under the bed, even the closet, but no one was there. Everything was as it should be. The windows were shut tight, no signs of forced entry, no noise, nothing at all. I tried to slow my breathing, convincing myself I was just too stressed and paranoid because of the storm. But as I turned to go down the stairs, I heard it again. Footsteps, definitely not mine. Heavy, slow, echoing down the hallway behind me. I froze, my whole body stiffening, then slowly turned my head around. He was there. At the end of the hallway, beneath the flickering light of a floor lamp on the second floor, a tall figure wearing a dark hoodie, arms hanging loosely by his sides, and his face, no, a mask. Smooth, rigid plastic, with two glowing eye sockets reflecting the flashlight beam. He didn't move, but I knew he was watching me, staring right at me. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. He started walking toward me step by step, slow, deliberate. No words, no sound but the rain. Just that cold presence silently closing in. I screamed almost instinctively and bolted down the stairs. Everything blurred, the pounding of my feet against the wooden steps, the rain drumming like a war drum outside, and behind me, the pounding footsteps. He was chasing me. I heard every tap of his shoe hitting the floor growing closer and closer. I tripped on a table leg, nearly fell, but managed to pull myself up and ran desperately upstairs, to the only bathroom with a lock. I slammed the door and locked the bolt with a loud snap, my heartbeat raging wildly in my ears. I turned the flashlight on again. The flickering light cast shadows on the mirror, the sink, and the damp walls. The small room suddenly became my only refuge. Then, the knocking started. Knock. One knock. Knock. Another. Not rapid, not aggressive, but steady, cold, as if he knew just how terrified I was. I turned on the speakerphone, called 911, my hands shaking so much I struggled to dial the numbers correctly. Every ring felt endless. I sobbed, stammered, but finally got connected. They said the police were on their way. I didn't know if I had enough time. All I knew was that door was thinner than I thought. The sound of sirens was like a life-saving bell, but by then I had nearly lost all sense of time. Every minute in that dark bathroom felt like an hour. I curled up in a corner, the weak beam of the flashlight fading, my eyes never leaving the doorknob. Then, the knocking stopped, followed by a loud scream, running footsteps, and the sound of a door being kicked open. They subdued him just outside the bathroom, just seconds before the lock was forced open. I heard handcuffs clicking. They said, "It's okay, come on out." But I still didn't dare open the door immediately. He wasn't carrying a gun or a big knife, just a small paring knife and a pair of black gloves soaked with rain. When they removed his mask, I was speechless. I knew him. He had been a regular at the small supermarket where I worked part-time, quiet, reserved, always looking at me with strange eyes. I used to think he was just shy. I even smiled at him. Never did I imagine that I had invited a nightmare into my life with a single kind glance. He was arrested. The police took his statement, filed reports, and took him away as part of procedure. But no one mentioned me, the one who had to keep living in the house that had become a crime scene. I thought changing the locks would be enough. But no, it wasn't that simple. I no longer saw this house the same way. Every door became suspicious, every window a vulnerability. I changed the locks, added bolts, installed cameras, and put motion sensors in the hallway. Every creak of the wind through the cracks made me hold my breath. I couldn't sleep with the lights off. I placed a chair behind my bedroom door. I began keeping notes of everyone I ever met at work, their names, faces, eyes. I trusted no one anymore. I dared not. The law could lock him up, but the feeling that someone once watched you through a crack, stood behind you when you thought you were alone, nothing can erase that. And you won't understand until it happens to you. I still live alone, but I'm no longer the Lily who used to fall asleep to the sound of rain, who once thought her home was a safe haven. Now, every time a heavy rain falls, I lie still and listen. Listen for the smallest sounds, a creak in the wooden floor, an echo from the upper floor, a breath that isn't mine. I learned to check dark corners, look over my shoulder before turning off the light. I lock the door twice. I live as if something is always waiting for my first mistake. And if tonight you're alone, if you hear something strange from upstairs, don't tell yourself it's just the wind. I used to tell myself that, just once, and I almost never lived to tell the tale again. I am Jane, 22 years old, and it was my first time babysitting for the Miller family. They lived in an old 2-story house in a quiet suburb where darkness was dense and everything seemed shrouded in heavy silence. That night, when I arrived, Bobby and Tiffany, their 2 lovely children, were fast asleep. I tried to stay calm, sitting at the small kitchen table, focusing on my college homework under the warm yellow light, while the steady rain outside the window played a somber soundtrack for the house. Suddenly, the phone on the table rang loudly, making me jump. My voice trembled as I asked, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But there was no answer, only heavy breathing, long, drawn out, like the breath of a predator lurking silently and threateningly in the dark. My heart immediately raced. I hung up and tried to reassure myself that it was just someone's prank or a technical glitch. But the unease crept deep inside me, making it impossible to focus. I just hoped the phone wouldn't ring again. The silence became oppressive, pressing down on every breath, as if the house was guarding a deadly secret I had yet to realize. Less than 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end was no longer heavy breathing, but a cold, chilling question. "Have you checked the children?" The voice was gentle, yet full of menace, sending shivers down my spine. I stammered, "Who's calling?" "What? Who are you?" But no one answered. Everything went silent again, except for faint, ragged breathing. I could do nothing but feel trapped in a horrifying psychological game. The calls repeated, like a silent warning about something lurking right inside the house. 15 tense minutes passed before the phone rang again. The cold voice echoed in my ear. "Have you checked the children?" That question, repeated endlessly without change, was a constant reminder that I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making. My fear grew, each ring hitting my fractured mind like a brutal blow. I knew I had to go upstairs, check on Bobby and Tiffany to be sure they were safe. But my legs shook, strength nearly gone, and the old wooden stairs beneath me felt like they wanted to swallow me in the darkness. Exhaustion and fear almost stopped me from moving forward. I tried calling the Miller family, hoping they'd help calm me, but only heard the cold, empty sound of a busy signal. No one answered. The house seemed to isolate and chill more than ever, like an invisible trap tightening around me. I stood there, helpless and alone, while the phone's ringing never ceased. Every ring sounded like the footsteps of death drawing nearer, making my heart pound wildly, breath shallow, and fear suffocating the whole space. I didn't know how much longer I could hold on in this house, when the horrors were lurking just at the edge of sight. I called the operator, voice trembling, begging for help. She told me to hold on. She monitored the calls. Each ring made my heart nearly explode. Every time it was the haunting question, "Have you checked the children?" like an unanswered challenge. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier, the flickering light making the room seem to shrink and contract. I felt someone silently watching me, something unseen but unmistakably present in the space. The loneliness and helplessness weighed down on me, driving me nearly mad. When the operator returned to the line, her voice was shaky and filled with worry. "Jane, get out of the house immediately. These calls aren't coming from outside. They're coming from inside your house." I rushed outside, calling the police as I tried to stay calm and recount everything. When the police arrived, they immediately split up to search every corner of the house. Their flashlights swept through dark corners, cracks in the walls and ceilings. The house was eerily silent, but There was a presence that made the air thick and suffocating, as if the intruder was still lurking somewhere. Finally, an officer found something unusual in the attic, a small door hidden behind piles of old clutter. They cautiously opened it, their flashlight illuminating the cramped space, barely big enough for one person to stand or lie down. And then, in the darkness, they saw a figure, a man silently hiding, filthy-faced, cold-eyed, staring down into the room below where I had spent the entire night. A knot of fear tightened in my chest as the police pulled him out, handcuffed him, and led him away. He had been hiding right above me all this time, watching my every move, every breath, every step. What I thought was safety turned out to be terrifyingly fragile. I still remember clearly that moment when I looked into his eyes and knew I had not been alone in that house all along. It chilled my heart, and that haunting stayed with me ever since. The intruder was arrested, handcuffed, and taken away from the house I once trusted as the safest place. But even locked up, the memory of that dreadful night clings to me tightly. Every time the phone rings in the middle of the night, my heart tightens and my eyes snap open in shock at the cold, ringing tone, waking me up from my dreams. I started doubting every small noise in the house, the wind blowing through cracks, creaking wooden floors, and strange sounds echoing down the dark hallway. What was once peaceful became oppressive and terrifying. I dared not leave the door even slightly open. I installed security cameras throughout the house to monitor every movement, every step, even when I was inside. Every door was locked tightly. I added extra bolts and motion sensors to ensure no one could break in again. But safety was no longer a given. Each night, as the lights went out, darkness felt like an abyss full of invisible fears, making my heart race and breath quicken. If you've ever been home alone and received strange calls, never ignore them. They aren't harmless pranks or silly mistakes, but clear signs of a threat lurking right inside your home, the place you believe is safest. I thought I was strong enough to face anything, but that one night changed everything. The cold breath over the phone, the repeated questions like warnings, and the feeling of being watched at every step in the dark. Those are things that can't be shaken off. If you hear those voices in the night, be cautious. The person standing near you might not be human, but the living nightmare itself. I only hope you never have to endure that horror, and always remember that safety is the most precious thing. Don't let carelessness or the silence of the night make you a target. Stay alert and protect yourself before it's too late.